The videos really changed how we
bad time.
A call came in early in the morning, carrying exhaustion and a sense of helplessness. The landowner said the situation had spiraled out of control. The wild boars had been returning night after night, and each time they left, the field were left in worse condition. When the control team arrived, what stood out most was not just the extent of the damage, but the overwhelming sense of frustration. There was no time to hesitate. The first step was to survey the entire area, reading every trace to understand how the herd was moving.
Gotta protect it.
Probably 100 by 100 where these hogs have been in. And they hadn't been in this field.
All this is really fresh rooting task, and if, say, the grass...
The land was quickly divided into 3 key points. These were the main routes the boars frequently used. There was no room for chance. If only one direction was controlled, the rest of the herd would become alert. And once that happened, every plan that followed would become far more difficult. So the strategy was not to wait for a single trap to work, but to see which direction would be triggered first. Close to midnight, the first signal appeared. A small group moved into the outer trap zone. They behaved naturally, with little caution, perhaps because the area had already been heavily trampled before. When the first mechanism was triggered, the sharp sound of metal shattered the silence. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The animals inside reacted strongly, but the locking system held firm. The control team quickly moved in and handled the situation during the night. It was an opening step, but not the most critical one. Less than 30 minutes later. Movement was detected at the second point. This time, the group was larger and more cautious. A few individuals stepped in, then paused, turning back as if ready to retreat. If the entire group had withdrawn into the forest, the opportunity would have been lost. In that tense moment, a large individual moved forward. Calm, unhurried, it stepped into the center, and the others gradually followed. When the mechanism was triggered, the entire steel frame shook violently. The sound carried farther, signaling a much stronger reaction than before. The control team had to act quickly before the disturbance spread. Two points had been secured, but one area remained silent. That was the most concerning part. The third point lay deeper inside, near a primary movement route. After the first 2 traps were triggered, there was no signal from the zone. The prolonged silence was more unsettling than the earlier metallic noise. The herd might have scattered, or perhaps most of them were waiting further back. A decision was made. Hold position and do not intervene.
Just back up.
Near dawn, just as everything seemed to be over, the final signal appeared. A large group was moving into the third area. They did not rush in, but circled cautiously, constantly observing. A manual trigger was too risky. If it failed, the entire herd would disappear and might never return. Time seemed to slow. As the first light emerged, the automatic system activated. The gate closed smoothly, firm enough to contain the entire group, yet gentle enough to avoid panic. The control team did not approach immediately. Only after full daylight did they return to inspect. Most of the herd had been secured within the third zone. Only then did the true scale of the problem become clear. This was not a race of numbers. It was a process of behavioral adjustment. Observation, patience, and understanding herd psychology were the decisive factors.
Not like you just be doing all that.
In another area, a residential security system recorded movement in the middle of the night. There was no loud noise, only a subtle vibration from the alert system. Camera footage showed a group of wild boars moving in formation, advancing in an orderly line. This was not random behavior. It was evidence of a well-established threat. The herd stopped at the boundary between the natural zone and the residential area. But this time, the timing was precise. The gate closed quietly. The entire group was contained within the control zone, completely separated from the residential area. No noise, no panic, and no one in the neighborhood realized what had taken place that night.
It was a morning that anyone who has ever worked in agriculture would never easily forget. As the first light of day touched the fields, unusual signs had already become clear. The ground was torn up into large patches, plant roots were ripped out of the dry soil, and dense tracks stretched from the forest edge deep into the cultivated area. These were no longer scattered signs. A herd of wild boars had established a consistent movement pattern and begun systematic destruction. Under that pressure, a control plan had to be implemented immediately. Traditional methods were tested first, but when facing a large herd with a well-defined social structure, capturing individuals one by one proved ineffective. On the contrary, each escape only made them more cautious. The herd began to change its approach, stopping farther away, circling around trap areas, and avoiding any spots with unusual signs. The old tactics were no longer suitable. A completely different approach was required. A larger net trap system was deployed. The space was expanded, the structure became more flexible, and it was sufficient to cover a wide area. However, even when the gate closed during an early morning trigger, the result was still not as expected. Only a single individual was captured. The herd once again demonstrated its remarkable adaptability. At this point, the confrontation was no longer simple. It had become a true battle of wits. The decisive change came when the entire system was relocated to a low, damp area in the eastern section. Here, a large-scale steel structure was erected, measuring up to 4 by 8 meters. Unlike the smaller traps used before, this system was designed to capture the entire herd intact. The bait was carefully selected, using strongly scented food to stimulate the sense of smell of the leading individuals. The acclimatization process continued, but this time without haste. The wild boars were allowed to move freely in and out over several days, gradually developing a sense of safety. As hunger began to outweigh caution, each individual started venturing deeper into the trap area. Large males, weighing over 100 kilograms, with thick skin and muscular bodies, led the herd. They moved slowly but steadily, step by step into the central zone where the food was placed. Then, at a carefully calculated moment, the triggering mechanism was activated. The steel gate snapped shut instantly, blocking all escape routes behind them. Upon approaching the site, flashlight beams revealed multiple pairs of eyes reflecting in the darkness. Low, continuous sounds echoed, not panic, but the alert response of a herd confined in a tight space. However, the system had been securely reinforced. The steel frame, thick mesh, and anchor points all functioned as designed. Every attempt to break free proved unsuccessful. As daylight began to spread, the entire scene became clearer. A full herd of wild boars, from adults to juveniles, was contained entirely within. There were no longer signs of scattering or escape as before. This was the first time the control system had achieved its most critical objective, capturing the herd as a whole rather than isolating individuals. The final phase was carried out immediately afterward. A specialized trailer was brought up to the trap entrance, forming a continuous passage. Barriers were fixed on both sides to ensure a controlled direction of movement. When the gate was opened, the herd had no choice but to move forward along the only available path. The entire process was carried out quickly and under control, removing the entire herd from the cultivated area. The confrontation with wild boars is not simply a matter of strength or numbers. It is a combination of observation, understanding behavior, and choosing the right strategy. When the appropriate method is applied, the result goes beyond mere control. It restores stability to the entire agricultural ecosystem. And on the fields that were once devastated, peace finally returns.
In many rural areas, wild boars don't appear randomly but follow familiar routes, repeating them night after night. They break through fences, move along field edges, and can destroy entire crops within just a few hours. The biggest mistake is treating early signs as insignificant. Once a steady food source is found, the whole herd keeps returning, making control much harder if the response comes too late. Security cameras captured a scene that left people no time to react. In broad daylight, an adult wild boar suddenly appeared in the city and charged at residents. Everyone panicked and tried to get out of its way as it moved forward. It all happened within seconds, yet clearly showed how the line between nature and urban life is slowly fading. Instead of rushing in, the first step is to survey the area and identify the herd's paths. Transition zones between forest edges and farmland, where tracks are dense, are often the most effective trap locations. Setting traps in the wrong place not only lowers success, but also makes the herd more alert. Once they sense danger, the entire strategy must be rebuilt from scratch at a higher level of difficulty. Steel foothold traps are used to control individuals that move alone or ahead of the herd. These traps are placed along familiar trails where footprints are dense. What matters is not just the mechanism, but how well the setup blends into the environment. The soil covering must look natural and undisturbed, since even a small irregular detail can cause wild boars to change direction instantly.
Oh yeah.
The effectiveness of foothold traps depends heavily on managing human scent and traces. The trapping area must remain undisturbed, avoiding footprints or foreign smells. Local soil is usually used to cover the trap and preserve its natural scent. When set correctly, the trap can capture a lead or cautious individual, disrupting the movement of the entire group. In areas where wild boars have become wary of metal, handcrafted wooden traps are a better option. These traps are built from simple wooden pieces, using natural materials to create a familiar feel. The mechanism relies on gravity or pulling force, without exposing metal parts. This reduces the chance of detection, especially for herds that have encountered traps before. Setting a wooden trap is not just about building a frame, but also guiding behavior. Bait is placed deep inside to force the animal into the trigger zone. Distance, height, and approach direction must match its movement habits. Once triggered, the structure collapses or locks quickly. This simplicity helps the trap work reliably across different terrains. When dealing with an entire herd, large corral traps are the most effective option. A circular or square frame is built with strong posts and enclosed with steel mesh, creating a space large enough to hold multiple animals at once. Unlike single traps, the goal is not speed but capturing the whole group in one attempt. This prevents the remaining animals from becoming alert and changing their behavior in future encounters. The strategy with corral traps always begins with an acclimation phase. During the first nights, the gate is kept fully open, allowing the herd to move in and out freely. Bait is gradually placed from outside to inside to build a sense of safety. Cameras help track numbers and frequency.
What's up, big boy?
Only when most of the herd forms a habit of entering is the gate triggered at the right moment, ensuring maximum effectiveness in one attempt. In the end, no single trap is the only solution. Effectiveness comes from combining methods based on the herd's behavior. When every step is guided by observation and patience, control becomes proactive instead of reactive. If you found this useful, leave a comment and don't forget to follow for more strategies ahead.
Customer in Alabama has been using our mic. At first, everything appeared only as faint signals. A few patches of soil were slightly disturbed. Faint footprints blended into the damp ground, and flattened grass suggested that something had quietly passed through during the night. No one truly considered it a significant threat, but within just a few days, those scattered details gradually formed a clearer picture. A herd of wild boars was silently establishing a movement route right along the edge of the production area. Their movement was not random. Every action followed a familiar route. From the forest edge, they moved along the tree lines, crossed low-lying areas, and headed straight toward the most accessible food sources. When one individual found food, the entire herd would return along the same path. And once that habit was established, most deterrent methods became nearly ineffective. Instead of reacting immediately, the first step was systematic observation. Cameras were placed at locations showing the clearest signs, where the soil had been repeatedly turned over, where fences had been bent under pressure, and where trails kept reappearing. After just a few nights, the herd's entire behavioral pattern was gradually revealed. They appeared at nearly fixed times, moved in stable formations, with adult individuals leading and the younger ones following closely. Behind at a suitable area was selected as the intervention point. It was not too obvious, yet close enough to the movement route to avoid altering the herd's natural behavior. Here, a mechanical trapping system was installed. The trap frame was firmly secured, and the door was designed to allow entry but prevent exit. Every detail had to be precise, as even a minor error could cause the entire plan to fail. Bait was placed at the center, but not intended to attract them immediately. In the early days, the trap door was kept fully open. The herd gradually became familiar with the space, without sensing danger. They moved in and out naturally, slowly developing a sense of safety. This was the most critical phase, when the herd's alertness was naturally lowered. Night after night, the number of individuals entering the trap area increased significantly. Larger animals began moving deeper inside, while the younger ones followed without hesitation. Cameras recorded the entire process, helping determine the exact moment when the herd was most fully present. There was no rush. Everything was calculated to achieve maximum effectiveness in a single attempt. And then the moment arrived, when the entire herd was inside. The triggering mechanism was activated. The trap door dropped swiftly, sealing off all exits. There was no loud noise, no prolonged chaos, just a decisive and precise movement. The entire herd was contained within a controlled space.
Fuzzy-eared mama. If you count the 4 to 10 piglets twice a year, somewhere around 4 to 10, those females in that bunch.
The key advantage of this method lies not in the number of individuals captured, but in its ability to break the recurring cycle. When the entire herd is removed at once, the pressure on the surrounding environment is significantly reduced. There are no more nightly returns, no more accumulating damage over time. Afterward, the entire handling process is carried out under strict procedures, from ensuring safety and securing the area to transportation. Every step is prepared in advance. There is no element of randomness. This is not merely an isolated action, but part of a long-term strategy to maintain balance between production and the natural environment. Notably, when such a system is implemented correctly, its effectiveness does not end with a single use. Nearby areas begin adopting similar methods based on observation, behavioral analysis, and controlled intervention. Because in the end, the issue is not the presence of the herd, but how humans respond. When actions are guided by understanding rather than impulse, everything changes. It is no longer a prolonged confrontation in the dark, but a clear, strategic, and increasingly effective process of control with each implementation.
In 2018, North German radio reported a reality that left many people stunned. Wild boars had appeared right in the middle of the city, to the point that the police had to step in to stop them. This was no longer a story from distant forests, but a threat that had moved right up to residential areas. In October, in Itzehoe, Schleswig-Holstein, near AM Padschbecken Park, a family that had lived there for 30 years suddenly witnessed a children's playground being torn up by wild boars. During the day, they almost completely disappeared. But once night fell, the entire area became a place where the boars returned to wreak havoc. Fearing that danger could strike at any moment, the family installed cameras to record their activity and also sent a letter requesting government intervention. But when these destructive intruders had already become so used to hiding and then suddenly returning, could humans truly do enough to stop them? Under growing pressure from local residents, the authorities could no longer remain at the stage of monitoring and issuing warnings. A systematic control campaign began to take shape, with careful study of the boars' travel routes, hiding spots, and appearance patterns at different times of day. From the data collected, a series of trapping methods was gradually set up at key locations. In some places, large steel cages were used to hold several animals at once. In others, smaller steel cages were placed along narrow trails to catch individual boars that had split from the herd. In several other areas, fixed control methods were also arranged at points the boars regularly passed through. At this stage, the confrontation was no longer made up of scattered and temporary reactions, but had become a real control operation. Among these methods, small steel cages were prioritized in areas close to homes or in places where individual animals needed to be dealt with quickly. A solid steel frame combined with high-strength metal mesh created an enclosed space where, once the animal stepped in, it had almost no chance of turning back. The one-way door mechanism was simple but clearly effective. When the boar moved in to reach the bait, the door would automatically drop and lock behind it. The more it struggled, the harder it became to escape. When placed correctly along familiar trails or in areas showing signs of digging for food, this type of trap could begin producing results after only a few nights. Thanks to its more compact size, it was also much easier to position in narrow spaces. That was especially important in areas where every control measure had to be not only effective, but also designed to minimize disruption to the daily lives of local residents. In addition, in many situations, simpler solutions still delivered significant results. Some fixed methods continued to be used in suitable areas because they could be deployed quickly, neatly, and without requiring too much equipment. By choosing the right location, taking advantage of a secure anchor point, placing bait, and camouflaging the setup carefully, the entire process could be completed in a short time. The cost was low, but if it was placed in the right spot and adjusted to match the movement habits of the boars, the effectiveness of control could still improve noticeably over time. That flexibility is exactly why these seemingly simple solutions continued to play an important role in the overall control strategy. In reality, large and complex systems were not always the most suitable choice for every hotspot. Sometimes, it was the quickly deployed measures, closely adapted to the terrain and the behavior of the boars, that created the clearest difference in long-term control. No matter which method was used, the final goal remained the same: to restore safety to residential areas and prevent the wild boars from returning to destroy them again. But as the boars continue adapting more effectively to living near humans, will these measures truly be enough to stop this intrusion?
No decision was made immediately. For nearly 3 weeks, the farm owner simply observed in silence and endured. Night after night, as darkness fell, the wild boars returned. No loud noises, no warning signs. They moved in like shadows, then disappeared, leaving behind fields torn apart and churned into chaos. At first, there were only a few scattered footprints around the edge of the forest. But in a short time, the signs became denser. Rows of crops were uprooted, patches of soil ripped open, and after just a few nights, an entire section of the farm was nearly wiped out. This was no longer random intrusion. It had become a clearly established movement corridor. As the damage began to exceed what could be tolerated, a control plan had to be put into action. But instead of rushing in, everything was done in reverse, stepping back and observing. Wild boars only return when they feel safe, and that very sense of safety would become their weakness. In the first few days, no traps were set. There was only bait. Corn, grain, molasses, and scent attractants were spread evenly each night at the same location. The goal was not to capture them immediately, but to create a habit. As the food source became familiar, the boars began returning more frequently. Then a large trapping system was set up, with bait laid from the outside inward, forming a natural path. There was no force, no sign of anything unusual. Everything was kept exactly as it had been on previous nights, with only one difference: the trigger mechanism was ready. Near midnight, the first movements appeared. One by one, they stepped in, slowly, without suspicion. When the last one entered the central area, the signal was triggered. The gate slammed shut with a sharp, dry sound. In an instant, the entire herd was contained inside. The sound of metal rang out repeatedly. Bodies slammed against the steel frame, dust rising into the air. The chaos lasted for several minutes, then gradually subsided. The first night ended with a clear result. Part of the herd had been controlled. But it did not stop there. In the following nights, other groups continued to appear. A larger herd, including young ones, entered the area without hesitation. This showed that the system was working as intended, not just attracting a single group, but multiple herds sharing the same movement corridor. The number of traps was increased. Each night, a few more individuals were captured. There were no longer massive catches like at the beginning, but it was enough to maintain pressure. Then, on a moonlit night, the largest herd yet appeared. They followed the familiar path, stepping forward without the slightest caution. When the last one crossed the boundary, the mechanism was triggered. The gate slammed down, the metallic crash piercing the stillness. Inside, chaos erupted, then quickly faded as every escape route was sealed. Under the dim moonlight, the entire herd was subdued. It was not a sense of victory, but of relief. After weeks of observation and preparation, the damage had finally been brought under control. The next morning, the work shifted to the handling phase. No longer observation or waiting, but transport.
Golly.
A guided passage was set up, maintaining a safe distance and minimizing stress so the boars could be moved in a controlled direction. The adults, the ones responsible for the most damage, were prioritized first. When everything was over, the farm gradually returned to its quiet state. No more dense footprints, no more patches of land destroyed overnight. But the most important thing was not the number that had been controlled, but how it was done. Not rushed, not random, but observing long enough to act at the right moment. In controlling wild boars, patience is sometimes the deciding factor. Not to wait, but to ensure that when action is taken, it is effective from the very first time. This place has been repeatedly devastated by wild boars. Fields are torn apart, fences collapse, and the damage returns season after season. Small traps only catch a few individuals, while the rest of the herd quickly learns to avoid them and becomes even more aggressive. We realized we could no longer deal with the problem in a fragmented way. Together with local farmers, a collective decision was made to build a large trap strong enough to capture the entire herd at once. This was not just a solution, it was a turning point to finally end the long cycle of destruction. While the sunlight was still strong, we began constructing the trap. Heavy steel panels were carried out and assembled into a sealed circular structure. Every joint was tightened carefully, and each post was driven deep into the dry ground. The sound of hammers striking metal echoed sharply through the still air. From the outside, it looked like nothing more than a cold steel frame. But in reality, it was a massive lock, waiting for the exact moment to close. Once the structure was complete, we installed infrared cameras around the area, mounting them high on tree trunks to monitor every path leading inside. Everything was prepared quickly, but with absolute precision. The final step was baiting. Bags of corn were opened, releasing a sweet scent that drifted through the late afternoon air. We scattered the corn to form a faint trail, leading from the outside deep into the trap. Step by step, the herd would be guided inward without realizing it. When everything was done, the area returned to silence. Only the lingering scent of corn remained, and somewhere in the forest, sharp noses had already begun to pick up the familiar smell. As night fell, the forest seemed completely still. But that silence brought no sense of safety. Then, movement appeared on the screen. The wild boars had arrived. The lead boar stepped forward, moving slowly, sniffing the air as it advanced. Behind it, others emerged one by one, different sizes, forming a line heading toward the trail. Wild boars have strong instincts and sharp awareness of their surroundings. But tonight, hunger and the scent of corn overpowered any sense of danger. Led by the dominant boar, the entire herd moved in without hesitation. When the last one crossed the boundary, we confirmed the whole herd was inside. And at that exact moment, the gate was triggered. The sound of metal crashing echoed sharply, shattering the silence of the forest. Instantly, everything turned chaotic. The herd panicked, rushing in all directions, slamming into the steel walls, colliding with each other in desperation. The ground was torn apart under their force. The metal structure shook violently. The strongest boars tried to break through, but it was useless against the carefully engineered barrier. Some smaller ones attempted to climb or jump over, but the height of the fence held them back. Panic spread through the entire herd as they realized there was no escape. Before dawn broke, we approached the trap. The scene had completely changed from the night before. The boars were no longer thrashing violently. Many were exhausted, breathing heavily. Some stood still, nearly motionless from fatigue. Yet their instincts still pushed them to react at any movement. More than 20 wild boars had been captured in a single attempt, a result that once seemed impossible. For the first time, the farmers could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Before opening the trap, the entire structure was checked one last time. Every joint, every lock was carefully inspected to ensure there were no risks. The team observed the herd's behavior to avoid unexpected situations. As the handling process began, panic flared up again, but every step followed strict safety procedures. Specialized equipment was used to minimize risks for both people and nearby livestock. And in that moment, everyone understood, success did not come from luck. It came from choosing the right strategy from the very beginning and seeing it through to the end. A silent battle is spreading across the vast fields of Texas, where the boundary between farmland and the wild is gradually fading. Wild boar herds appear unpredictably, but once they enter, they leave unmistakable traces: soil torn apart, crops uprooted, and entire areas destroyed in just a single night. What worries farmers is not only their destructive power, but how quickly they learn and adapt. Traditional control methods are becoming ineffective, forcing farmers to turn to a decisive solution: large-scale traps designed to target entire sounders rather than individual animals. If you're interested in how they protect farms from this growing threat, subscribe to follow whether this solution truly works. The pressure begins with increasingly severe and hard-to-control damage. No longer isolated incidents, wild boar attacks now follow repeated patterns. They return to the same locations, move along familiar paths, and target the most accessible areas. Irrigation systems are destroyed, farmland is disrupted, and recovery costs rise with every season. What was once considered a rare rural issue has now become a standard part of farm management across the state. Beyond physical damage, wild boars also bring serious biological risks. As they move across different areas, they unknowingly become carriers that spread disease. Viruses and bacteria can persist in the environment, attaching to water sources, soil, or feed. This puts livestock operations at risk of infection without clear warning signs. Once an outbreak occurs, the consequences can spread far beyond a single location, affecting entire production systems. The danger escalates when wild boars feel threatened. Mature individuals, especially during breeding season, can react quickly and unpredictably. This makes direct contact extremely risky, not only for farmers but also for control teams.
I got more.
In addition, their presence near roads increases the risk of collisions, leading to property damage and potential injuries. Controlling wild boars is no longer optional. It has become a necessity. In response, large-scale trapping systems are being deployed as a central solution. Unlike traditional small traps, this design focuses on capturing entire herds in a single operation. The structure is typically circular or polygonal, built with strong steel mesh or reinforced metal panels.
Correct position. All right, so
Support posts are driven deep into the ground to ensure stability against the force of multiple animals. The trapdoor is wide enough to allow the entire herd to enter without hesitation. The key difference lies in how the system is operated. Instead of triggering the trap when only a few animals appear, cameras are used to monitor the entire herd. Bait is placed at the center and maintained over several days to create a sense of safety. Only when the entire herd is inside and no individuals remain outside on alert does the operator activate the door remotely. This waiting for the right moment significantly increases the success rate. When the door drops, the entire space instantly becomes enclosed. With no escape route, the herd is contained without the need for chasing or causing panic. The result is not only a large number of animals controlled in a single event, but also a reduced chance for remaining boars to learn and avoid traps in the future. This marks a shift from passive control to a proactive approach, one that more effectively protects crops, maintains balance, and ensures the long-term stability of farms.
Yep. Easy, come on now. Yep. Let's drop that gate. There you go. Oh, get on the bus. There you go. Yep. There you